has established the Labor Commission on Racial and Economic Justice to facilitate a broad conversation with local labor leaders around racial and economic disparities and institutional biases, and identify ways to become more inclusive as a new entrance to the labor force diversifies. How would you address racial and economic inequality as a congressperson?
Well, that was a lot. Okay.
Do you want me to repeat?
Yeah, can you repeat that?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So, the AFL-CIO has established the Labor Commission on Racial and Economic Justice to facilitate a broad conversation with local labor leaders around racial and economic disparities and institutional biases, and identify ways to become more inclusive as a new entrance to the labor workforce diversifies. So how would you address racial and economic inequality as a congressperson?
Well, I think that's a great first step. I mean, I think that's wonderful to bring everybody to the table and figure out, you know, what problems are we seeing? What inequalities are we seeing? What can we do to help fix this system? I think, you know, I talk about poverty a lot here in the Syracuse region specifically. I mean, 50% of the kids who are born in the city of Syracuse are born into poverty, and we're listed as #1 in the entire nation for concentrated poverty in our Black and Hispanic communities. Well, I think, you know, what we need to do not only is have policies in place like raising the minimum wage and providing paid family leave and providing affordable daycare, but having people in poverty as part of the discussion. That is so valuable because it shouldn't be a top-down thing. It should be everybody together, working together. When I'm in Congress, you know, I'd love to work together, to have roundtable discussions, to have meetings, you know, to reach out into communities that haven't been reached out to before and make sure that we're talking to as many people as we can. I think it's great that the AFL-CIO has established this new program to figure out ways that they can help. I mean, if we all rise together, that's what's going to benefit this community, not just some, but all of us together.
Steve?
For there to even be a semblance of equality, everybody needs to have a voice. And Helen Hudson and I earlier were talking about the Voting Rights Act of 1965, right, Helen? And it's set to expire at whatever year. That's not the concern. The concern is the Supreme Court decision of Shelby County versus Holder from 2013, which gutted the Voting Rights Act. It is ineffectual now. That law stands for this idea. If an area of the country that traditionally discriminated against people creates a new voting law that could affect people's right to vote, it needs to go through the federal government for approval first. The Supreme Court in Shelby County versus Holder decided we don't need that anymore. We don't need it. Alabama can pass whatever kind of identification requirement they want. And that keeps people from voting. If I go to Congress, I'm going to support legislation to make the Voting Rights Act once again effectual and to put the teeth back into it. Because if you're going to even take a step towards equality, people got to have a voice. That's #1. #2, going to fight for jobs. Fight for jobs. Listen, there's been unfairness in this country since the day it was born. But one thing's for sure. Unfairness, racial tensions, and discrimination get worse when there are fewer jobs and fewer opportunities, and we're all scraping for the same crumbs, right? Let's give people a voice. Let's create jobs.
Thank you. Eric?
Yes. We live in a remarkable nation. If we do it right, we become a multiracial, multi-ethnic model for the world. If we do it wrong, as Mr. Trump would have us do, we become a disaster. Race, ethnicity are often the hardest things to talk about in our society. I think it's important that unions are putting together that table and others. They're also connected. Inequality, income inequality, and wealth inequality shift power away from certain groups. Low-income groups are discriminated against. We need, of course, to improve the Voting Rights Act again. We need to fight like heck those forces, mainly Republican, who are trying to restrict voting. And we need to probably build bridges in all sorts of ways, opportunities through our churches, our mosques, our temples. They all need to be taken. Opportunities to bring labor and business together on this issue is also very important.
Okay, rebuttals. Colleen?
I would just, I'd like to add to another aspect of this. I think we need to reform the criminal justice system. I know there's legislation locally for ban the box, and I would be, supportive of introducing legislation on the federal level to also have ban the box. I think that's a simple step we can take, so we're not allowing people to be restricted access to even applying for jobs. I think there are some small steps we can take and then make it towards the bigger steps moving forward.
Steve?
Well, one of the things we need to do as far as reforming our criminal justice system, and by the way, we incarcerate more than any country. It's ridiculous. We incarcerate minorities. We incarcerate the mentally ill. It's got to change, okay? And one thing we need to do is get rid of the federal sentencing guidelines that dictate how long somebody's going to go to prison. The judge has no discretion at all. He cannot consider the mitigating circumstances. He must sentence people or a person to a certain amount of time regardless of his discretion. That's not working. We need to decriminalize petty crimes, right? And we need to provide treatment for the mentally ill. The number of hospitals for the mentally ill per capita in this country is about 20% of what it was in 1968. We have far more people and far less mental facilities.
Thank you, Steve.
We need to change that.
Eric?
Yeah, I agree. Our criminal justice system, jails, prisons, has become the new mental health system for chronically ill people often. 17% of the people in the mental health system, that is in the criminal justice system, have a diagnosis of severe mental illness. That's nuts. We changed that once, we got to change it again. We also see that system as systematically undermining human beings who go out of it with the label of felon, who go out of it unable to get work, who are spending time in prison without having opportunities to advance themselves, which is important. The lunatics on the right will say, oh, well, we don't want our taxpayers spent that way, but money spent that way. But we should be providing education and resources forward, and our mental health system is a shambles in our society. We have to do something about it. And that's also what I mean by elevating this notion of human dignity, that we're all part of this society. We got to invest.